What's going on, vinyl community? Welcome to another video with the record spinner. Doing something a little bit different for this video. There's no fancy edits, there's no intro, there's no outro. I'm literally filming this on my phone and just uploading it direct to YouTube so I can comment on the subject matter that has been kind of running wild within the vinyl community circles as of lately, and that is the subject matter of Mobile Fidelity and their use of digital. Now, there are two videos out there that I suggest that you check out, and if you have seen them, then you know exactly what I'm going to be talking about. Mike over at the In Groove, who runs a record store out in Phoenix, Arizona, he did an interview with three of Mobile Fidelity's mastering engineers discussing the subject matter, and there is also a StreamYard live stream that was done by 45 RPM Audiophile with Michael Fremmer, who is a well-respected journalist in the vinyl world for the past 30 years. He is one of my favorites, and if you watch those two videos, you can get a general sense of what is going on. So my video isn't really going to be providing any fresh revelations regarding the subject matter. I'm just commenting my thoughts on it, and as well as providing a bit of context with what was referenced in those videos. So the main headline: Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab has been using digital for their releases, including their Ultra Disc one-step pressings. Now, if you see me looking down, I took a lot of notes on this stuff because I want to make sure I cover all bullet points of, what my thoughts are regarding this. So, in terms of MoFi using digital, I can certainly see why customers feel like they have been lied to. And I can understand that because when you claim to be all analog, people are going to buy into that. And Mobile Fidelity is not the only dominating all analog reissue label. There is, of course, Analog Productions. There's also Intervention Records and a few others. The way I see it, Mobile Fidelity has this power of the brand, and they have been doing this since the 1970s. And I think that loyalists will flock to whatever product that they put out to the buying public. And I think because of what they have pulled off since the 70s going into the 80s, 90s, and beyond, they have built up, a reputation, and maybe they thought that they could get away with this or with anything that they could set out to do. And from my understanding, the releases can be seen as sourced from the original tapes, in the sense that, wherever the tapes are located, some are based out in the East Coast, some are based out on the West Coast, they will bring analog to digital converters and then get fresh transfers from the tapes, and that is what is used on the final product, such as the one-steps. Now, this is not exactly the first time that MoFi has delved into the digital realm. In terms of the vinyl world, we, of course, had the Silver Label series, which was a bit of a budget type of offshoot that MoFi had done, where basically it was not the original, analog tapes that were used as the source. It was either a secondary copy or maybe a digital file. And they distinguished this by, obviously, you can see that, it has that silver band on top. But, just for the sake of pointing it out, here I have a MoFi Press Foreigner's self-titled debut. Says original master recording, but because they cannot narrow down what source was used, obviously with it being not the original, they will instead put Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab over the top. Now, with something like this, given what entails with it, it was a little bit of a budget type of offshoot, and the price was definitely lowered down compared to something like this, which went for like 35 to 40 bucks. This, I believe, was going for 25 on MoFi's website. So given what you're buying and what entails with it, I think the price point is justifiable. And this leads into my personal biggest problem with this whole thing, and that is the price from a consumer's point of view. MoFi pressings are not exactly the cheapest thing to come across. Just given what entails with them and the audiophile nature, of course, they're going to be charged a little bit more than what you would see a regular standard reissue put out by any major label. And with costs going up with almost everything else in general daily life, prices are due to go up with these. So that means that a Mobile Fidelity Ultra Disc one-step pressing that is presumably digitally sourced is priced at $125. And honestly, I think that is very appalling because transparency is key when it comes to what is used and what the source is going to be. And if all analog is used, then you can charge out the wazoo for it. You know, there's more care that is brought to the table when it comes to the fragility of the tapes, the technology that is used to repair the various tape machines that are used to run these tapes, or even the tapes in general, just to either bake them in an oven to make sure that they are playable or anything of that sort. And sure, you know, the presentation of these one steps are very nice with the soft touch boxes, gold inlays, the translucent vinyl formulation that is used. You know, visually, it's done very nice and classy, but it is all about what it sounds like. Now, this is a huge, crucial matter that I think is also very subjective, because when it comes to audio and sound, our ears are tuned to what we like to hear. And I guess it poses the question of, does it matter what was used? And in this day and age, and before you dislike the video and unsubscribe, let me explain. I think it either does matter or doesn't matter. So if you are claiming to be all analog, either follow suit or be more transparent whether that affects the price point. So that definitely does matter. So I think if MoFi is going to go down this digital route with these one steps, they should follow suit what they did with, you know, the silver label. Charge appropriately, or if you have access to the master tapes, then you are justified for charging $125. Hell, even Analog Productions that is 100% all analog with their UHQR series, which it's funny, I want to do a video comparing the two, comparing Analog Productions UHQR and MoFi's Ultra Disc One Step. That's an idea for a future video down the road. They're charging roughly $125 for their product, and it's all analog, and it sounds absolutely amazing. And then you have something like this, where when you find out, you know, the real truth behind it, it just makes you really wonder, why do they do this, and why are they charging so much? But on the other hand, you know, it doesn't really matter, I think, to my ears, because the human ear is so powerful to dictate what sounds good, and in some cases, digital on vinyl can sound great, but what matters is how it is done. And I think it is so easy in this day, I wouldn't say this day and age, but in general, for digital to be misrepresented in the vinyl world. And that, of course, comes down to the way that the tapes are converted, you know, whether it's 24-bit, you know, bit mapping, DSD, you know, whatever. Mobile Fidelity uses DSD files for the new releases. Now, DSD is direct stream digital, which is a process that is used for super audio CDs, and MoFi also puts out super audio CDs almost simultaneously when they do a vinyl pressing. So there's always like a vinyl and CD counterpart. There's, you know, you have your fancy, you know, 45 RPM, whatever vinyl press, whether it's an ultra disc or, you know, a standard, you know, record release, and then you have the super audio CD. Now, the SACDs are also, I think, mastered at the same time as the vinyl. So some can say that perhaps it's worth just getting the super audio CD instead of the vinyl, but the EQ for vinyl is so sensitive that it can work very well. And I tend to think that Mobile Fidelity's engineers, they know what they're doing, and they won't do injustice to the brand. If anything, maybe they're being a bit more accommodating to the newer technology that is available, which is why a lot of corporate labels will often go down the digital route when it comes to putting out, you know, vinyl reissues of artists on their rosters. So I can go into this saying that, you know, if MoFi is going to use DSD files, it'll sound great, but transparency is key, and it is such a principle that should not be taken for granted, and I think it is needed. Because if people will fork out, you know, $100 for these one steps, because keep in mind, the MoFi one step ball kind of got rolling with like Santana Abraxas, which I believe was priced at $100. People bought it. That meant that they could raise the price to $125. And that is what this went for. That is what Carole King's Tapestry went for that I have in my collection. And if you look at, you know, Eric Clapton, all the Eagles stuff, the Van Halens that are coming out, the Michael Jackson Thriller, all $125. Now, I don't know if this bombshell is going to change anything, because let's just say in a perfect world, none of this was made known and people forked out money for those, then they could raise the price up to 150 and so on and so forth. So if there's a means to keep the product rolling and people buy into it, the prices are going to go up. Now, given what has been said, who really knows? I don't think that, Mobile Fidelity is over. I think they are still going to generate product, but maybe they will be a little bit more careful with how it is presented and the way things are worded, because I feel like that's a general tactic that labels and marketers will use at a vantage point when it comes to, sourced from the master tapes. Sure, it's sourced, but are you cutting it from the tape, or are you getting a fresh file that was freshly made specifically for that vinyl pressing from the master tape? That's why you really got to lock in and pay attention to these things. And when people wonder why, certain pressings may not sound good, then you can look back and know why. Now, I will say this, there are definitely some analog purists out there that swear solely by analog tape, and that is all that they want, for their vinyl reissues and such, which I understand. But keep in mind, when we see reissues, all analog reissues of some of these older albums, you got to keep in mind, like, any pressing that has come out prior was made when the tape was fresh. And that means just because of the material, tape can degrade, and it is up to sometimes the digital technology that we have at our disposal to salvage them and present them in a lavish fashion in the vinyl world. Now, sure, there are various things such as, backup tape copies and so on and so forth, and that'll act as a new master of sorts. That's if you want to go completely and faithfully down that route. But sometimes, the digital step and the digital, care that might be needed, to salvage them can really come in handy, and it's why you might have a certain reissue in your hands. That's just the God's honest truth. But that's not to say that you cannot tell the difference. For example, take a label like Analog Productions. There are titles that MoFi and Analog Productions have both done, particularly Muddy Waters' Folk Singer and Stevie Ray Vaughan's Couldn't Stand the Weather. Analog Productions is all analog. MoFi is using a DSD file or a tape copy, God knows what. I don't have any of those titles in my personal collection to say, yes, I put them on my turntable and I heard the difference. But if you were to do an A-B comparison, then you will most likely notice a difference. And it gives Analog Productions, I think, a bit more of a push for their credibility. Now, with MoFi, I don't know if this will turn people completely off from the label. I don't know if it's going to make people cancel their pre-orders or just get rid of whatever MoFi pressings are in question that are, supposedly from digital or are definitely from digital. As if you watched the interview with the MoFi engineers, they did comment, some things were done from DSD files and, and whatnot. I don't think, the label is over. They're still going to put out product, but I think the transparency is going to be beefed up in terms of stating what their stuff is sourced from. And like I said earlier, my biggest concern regarding this whole thing is the price point. $125 for a digital file is absolutely atrocious when you can just simply buy the Super Audio CD and pretty much get the same desired effect. But let me pose this question. Now, this doesn't really have anything to do with Mobile Fidelity and whatnot. This is purely an analog versus digital thing. Keep in mind, all the new albums that are coming out in this day and age from our favorite newer artists. They're working in the era of Pro Tools. Does it matter if we have a vinyl pressing of that digital album in our collections? Does it make the format completely obsolete? Does it tarnish the experience and the warmth of analog? That's something you got to ask yourself, because I think regardless of, what something is sourced from, whether it's tape or digital, it can still sound great and your ears can dictate that for yourself. Just because it says that it's sourced from a high-res file or whatever does not mean you should completely shun it. And this goes out to the analog purists out there that swear solely by analog. And I think, you're really almost kind of gatekeeping yourself a little bit, because I think for myself as a young person, because granted, look, I did not grow up in the era where vinyl was the main dominant format. I grew up collecting CDs, and then once I got into vinyl, that kind of phased out, and I started to kind of tune my ear to, the sound of analog. And believe me, I have the Beatles mono box set. I have some Mo-Fis. I have Analog Productions pressings. I know what analog can sound like. But I also have some digital sourced reissues, and I know what those sound like. And I think at the end of the day, just to kind of wrap this all up, put a nice big bow on it, does it matter how it's done? No. What matters is the way that it's presented and the way that it sounds to the human ear. So that right there are my thoughts on the whole Mobile Fidelity and digital fiasco, I guess you could say. It's certainly a hot topic going on here, and I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this? Please drop a comment down below. I'd love to know. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, give it a like, and subscribe to the channel. See you guys in the next video, and most importantly, keep the record spinning.